My guest today is Eric Windheim. Eric is the owner of Windheim Environmental Solutions. He is a building biologist as well as an electromagnetic radiation specialist. Welcome, Eric.
Good to see you again.
I'd like to focus today on magnetic fields in particular. The reason is that so much of the time, people get focused on RF, radio frequency radiation, which is a terrible thing. It's not like anything in nature. And it deserves the attention that it gets. But sometimes people have the habit of not looking carefully at the vestiges of the electrical system, the electric fields, the magnetic fields, and the dirty electricity. So today I want to kind of focus in on magnetic fields. Eric, I'm wondering if you'd tell us how you got into this line of work.
Okay, my parents were going downhill. One stroke, one cancer, one incident of neuropathy or dementia after another. I couldn't quite figure it out. And they didn't smoke. Well, my dad drank a little bit, but didn't drink. And what I found out after I got trained and certified, I measured what was going on in their house. I'm going, holy smoke, this is horrible. And the main thing is Dad did his own wiring to save some money. After all, he built his own home back in Omaha back in 1953. And so there were documentable magnetic fields in his home. And I didn't quite measure it or data log it, but it was 4 to 12 milligauss on the master bed. And of course, that is horrible. And then he used electric blankets to, save a little money. So between the electric blankets, hiring a handyman to do the wiring, and putting in the compact fluorescent light bulbs, which you can see in the corner down here, he saved maybe $2,000-$4,000. But what was the sick care cost? It was over $250,000. It was very traumatic watching him waste away, having to put my dad on hospice.
Kind of an amazing thing to think that what we can't see, touch, taste, feel, can cause us harm. And it seems to me it's just beyond the understanding of many people, but not for people who have been able to correlate the health effects that they're feeling with the exposures that they're having to non-native EMF, which is, the case that I had. And you mentioned, so your parents, in your parents' home, your dad was doing his own wiring. That's pretty common, people doing their own wiring.
Or hiring a handyman, like, hey, I know a guy that can do electricity.
Yeah.
He makes the light work, he gets paid, he leaves,
Yeah. So some people are going to say, well, there couldn't have been wiring errors because the house didn't burn down. What would you say to that, Eric?
The National Electric Code is based first and foremost on protecting people from shock and fire. And the National Electric Code is law. Okay, there's no two ways about it. Things have to be wired in a certain manner to avoid shock and fire. And there's about 4 different violations of the National Electric Code that create magnetic fields. So there's no alternative. There's no alternate method. This is the law. It's the law of physics. Electricity has to flow a certain way on wires, or you can get a shock, a fire, or a magnetic field.
Absolutely. So I think what a lot of people don't realize is that you can wire a home and it can pass inspection and still contain wiring errors because, well, why don't you go into the because?
Okay, now I find wiring code violations in every 4th house I visit, regardless of age, size, price, or location. And it did pass inspection, but that doesn't mean that the inspector did his job, okay? Because sometimes I open up the sub panel and find out that neutrals and grounds are visibly connected. My own naked eyeball can say, this is a violation of National Electric Code 300.3b or 250.24a5. And if people don't believe that, I whip out the code book, which I carry in my trunk, it's as big as an LA phone book, and say, this is a law, and that's a violation. And here's a picture of from Mike Holt. You've got a violation here. This is why you have net currents and huge magnetic fields in your daughter's bedroom. Okay.
Right. So it's possible to have all of your circuits in your home seemingly working just fine.
Working just fine. Yeah.
Working just fine. The lights come on when you flip the switch and the appliances run. Um, and it passed inspection. So I think a lot of people would think, well, there's no possibility for harm.
Yeah.
I'm thinking particularly about two branch circuits with traveling through a box, and normally you might get in the habit of just connecting all the neutral wires, right? But if they're coming from separate branch circuits, that's not always the right thing to do, correct?
Okay. Well, I have an actual sample of that right here. Okay. So can you see this this
Yes.
slide?
Yes.
Okay. So this woman called me up. She'd had lots of doctor visits. It's been going on for years. All the typical variety of symptoms. Doctors can't find anything wrong.
Go ahead and mention those symptoms.
Poor sleep, insomnia, fatigue, headaches, stress, agitation, anxiety, irritability, disorientation, dizziness, depression, in some cases, outright suicidal thoughts admitted by the client. Lots of doctor visits over 14 years, no results. Okay. So she goes, what the heck? I think I'm going to try an EMF specialist. So she's a very nice woman, owns her own business, a grandmother. We talked for a while, and I said, hey, this is a heat map of your kitchen, just like the weather heat map. But she always sat down here in this corner of the kitchen. I said, why don't you come over here and take a look at what I'm measuring on the countertop? No, I feel better over here. Ah, I see. Well, you have like triple the extreme concern magnetic fields here. So we could come back with the electrician and trace it. I think it's right at this outlet box where you've got a 20 amp kitchen counter outlet next to a 15 amp lighting circuit. And as soon as we opened it up, the electrician said, Eric, this is a 15 amp light circuit combined with a 20 amp outlet circuit. So this is a photo after we separated them. Originally, all the neutrals were under the same wire nut. Okay. And that's a violation of National Electric Code 300.3b. All conductors of the same circuit shall be contained within the same raceway, auxiliary gutter, cable tray, cable bus, trench, cable, or cord. Okay, so when we undid those two, she actually said, oh my gosh, what did you do? And I said, well, we just separated these two wires that were illegally connected. And instantly I did another, it was so dramatic. I said, hang on, let me do another heat map. And as you can see now, everything went to the no concern level. And she was so overjoyed. She says, and she even wrote a write-up for me. She went to some great degree to write several different testimonials. But she said, I felt the improvement instantly. Instantly. Now, not everybody gets an instant feeling, but she did. And she'd been struggling for a long time. Depression, horrible insomnia. And she suffered for 14 years. And she bought the house brand new in Rockland, California. Okay. So that just shows you how horribly wrong building inspectors. And when you talk to the inspector, they go, yeah, I know we could do a better job. We're overloaded. We don't have enough time. We don't have the training, and we certainly don't have the meters that you've got. So yes, but you know what? You did promise with your signature that this meets code, and it doesn't.
Yes, yes. And that's absolutely a perfect example of what I was talking about. And I can imagine people going from box to box, if they're doing their own work in particular, or maybe a tired electrician, it doesn't matter. And normally in each box, they're doing the same thing, usually twisting the white ones together just out of habit. But when you have two separate branch circuits going through, that's not the right thing. And you can create an enormous magnetic field. It's not just in the area of that box, but in the example that you just shared, it was throughout the entire kitchen and perhaps beyond. Now another,
It was.
yeah,
It spread around other ones too.
yeah, and it's amazing. And the lights still work, and so there's no reason to suspect. Now, if they loaded up both those circuits, you could in fact be creating a fire danger.
Oh, and
Because
this is with the only current was on the lighting circuit. There was nothing plugged in on the 20 amp countertop. So if we plugged in a toaster and a microwave on that 20 amp circuit, in addition to the 4 or 5 amps the lighting might have been doing, we could have really created some magnetic fields,
yeah,
up, and some net current. Really?
absolutely right, absolutely right. And people would say, well, that's not a problem because the breaker will trip. Well, it is a problem because that current, as Eric just mentioned in this example, is just flowing on the one white wire, which has no breaker. It's not being shared between the two circuits, correct?
Now, that's really an important thing. And I'm sure glad you mentioned that because the breaker's only on the hot,
Right.
period. And then when you get max current from two circuits, a 15 amp and a 20 amp, and you put it onto one 15 amp neutral, you've definitely got a 2 to 3 fold overload on that neutral. It's going to start getting warm. It's going to decay the insulation and cook it so it falls off. It could actually start getting red hot, so it starts incinerating whatever's in the wall.
Right, right, right. Another simple mistake that gets made over and over again has to do with putting in a sub panel. There's a main electric panel, usually at your service entrance, but oftentimes in a house, there'll be one or more sub panels that get wired back to that main electric panel where the cutoff will be, but then there are many branch circuits that are served from the sub panel. And oftentimes, the difference between creating an enormous magnetic field in the house comes down to one screw in the sub panel. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned one screw. That would be the green bonding screw. See, electric panels can be used as a main or a service entrance panel or a sub panel. And they come with a green bonding screw, which bonds the neutral bar to the case, which would be was what you'd want to do on a service entrance panel. And I've seen one house in Granite Bay, California. I mean, this is all multi-million-dollar homes. And this mother had a 6-month-old baby. It wasn't doing well. So I found out that there was a 15 milligauss field running from the service panel all the way to the sub panel, which was in the baby's room. Hmm. And the first thing we noticed is the green bonding screw was left in and screwed all the way in on the sub panel. And this passed inspection. As soon as we opened it and looked at it with our naked eyes, we could see the violation. National Electric Code 250.24A5. You cannot connect neutrals and grounds at any location other than the service entrance panel, period.
And sometimes we see mistakes that get made along the same lines where people will connect the neutral and the ground at a major appliance, for example. Have you seen that before?
Yeah, dryers. We went all the way around this house, found numerous high magnetic fields, and checked out all the panels. We found current on the copper hydronic water pipes and said, let's check the dryer. And the neutral and ground were connected on the back of the dryer where the Maytag repairman had screwed it in. And as soon as we did that, almost all the magnetic fields in the whole 3-story house went away.
Yeah, it's just amazing. And I want to share a couple of things really quickly. So coincidentally, last night I was on a phone call, and because of my background and my 38 years of survival with electromagnetic poisoning, I feel a ministry opportunity, if you will, to help people like myself who know they've been poisoned by this. So I was speaking with such a gentleman last night for the first time, and I was learning his story. And he was made sensitive in his conversation to me. He revealed this by a magnetic field, and he was able to tell me exactly what the exposure was and what happened. And of course, now he's also sensitive to other things like RF radiation. So it is really a significant issue. I have another client who had their infant, their newborn bassinet just on the other side of the wall from that house's main electric panel. It was a
Oh,
house that did not have electricity from the beginning, and it was retrofit. And so one side of that wall, you couldn't see that there was a main electric panel on the other side. So here's the bassinet right at the main electric panel. The difference between what Eric and I have been talking about in the last few examples of a wiring error, there were no wiring errors at the main electric panel, but the field strength of a magnetic field is proportional to the current, and all the current in the entire house goes through that main electric panel. So unfortunately, the infant was not thriving, but when they moved the bassinet, the child recovered itself very quickly. So,
now, by the way, Keith, I have a picture of that story that I was telling you about, the 15 amp magnetic field running from one end of the house to the other, and the green screw that was left in.
would you
So
like to show that?
yeah, sure. Okay. So let's see, share screen. Okay. So this is this is a sub panel in the baby's bedroom. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Okay. This is a screwdriver. This is called the bonding screw. The bonding screw bonds the neutral bus and the ground bus to the case. And the only place that can occur is the service entrance panel. So here we are clamping this clamp meter around the feeder ground, which comes from the service panel to the sub panel. And we're getting 3.19 amps.
Oh,
Because
hang on a second, Eric. Are you supposed to have any amps on a ground feeder?
yeah, that's a real good question. National Electric Code 250.6, that whole section is on objectionable current. And there shall never, ever be any continuous electric current on a grounding conductor, because grounding conductors are reserved to prevent a fault. It's supposed to be the ultra low impedance pathway for electricity to take in case there is a short. It's not made to be a regular conductor, and as evidence of that, it's not insulated either. So you should never, ever find any current on ground wires or other metallic pathways, including pipes,
Gas lines.
wires, Comcast lines, steel construction material. And in some cases, I crawl around under the house and find that they're using the gas pipe as a neutral wire.
Let's talk about meters just for a moment now. I mentioned if you had an RF, a radio frequency radiation meter, you're not going to find the problems that we're talking about today, the magnetic fields. But there are also meters out there that are very inexpensive and claim to give insight into electric fields, magnetic fields, and radio frequency radiation. I'd like to get your thoughts on this, Eric, because some of them, like I say, around $200, and they claim to be able to do all that. Can I find magnetic field strengths that would be of concern from a human health perspective? Can I expect to find those with an inexpensive meter?
Well, the only one that I would recommend for entry-level people, it would only be due to the cost factor, would be the tri-field meter, which does an acceptable or fair job on 3-axis magnetic fields. And it does an absolutely poor job on wireless radiation and electric fields. But everybody, including myself, I bought the first meter I bought was a quote tri-field meter. It's great marketing, just like 3-in-1 oil. Does 3 things at once. But people are really deceiving themselves if they think they can go out and buy a meter for less than $200 that's going to do everything they need. But they'll defend it because they made that investment and they want to believe that it's A-okay.
Let's talk a little bit about situations that can be remediated. And that's all that we've talked about today so far. In other words, you've been able to go in, you've been able to do a methodical assessment of a home to understand what the issues are that are creating a magnetic field. And then you haven't mentioned, but I know the way you work, you bring in a licensed electrician, and then you and he will together uncover these problems. And so far, in every example that we've talked about today, I believe the result has been the remediation of that magnetic field, even over a very broad area in the house. But there are some situations that cannot be remediated. Can we talk about those?
Sure. Okay, this is client W. Quickly got sick and had to retire. Now she's spending all day, all night at home. She became wheelchair bound. Shortly after that, bed bound. She could feel her life passing away day by day, so she arranged for assisted suicide in Switzerland. And sadly, her whole family agreed. And they said, let's take one last family vacation up to the California coastal redwoods. Wow, she recovered. Oh, came back home, got sick again. So that's when she contacted me. And I just want to show you, this is the temperature heat map you see on the weather page. Well, we did a heat map of her bed. Up here at the top of the pillow, we're about 50% over extreme. There's no place on her bed that is not above extreme concern range. This is an NFA 1000 meter. It's specially made for building biologists. It's extremely sensitive and extremely versatile. And it's really what you need to do precision magnetic field measurement. So, and by the way, instead of trying to accumulate all of these meters yourself and learn how to use them and interpret the data, it's far less expensive and far more effective and wise to hire a certified, trained person like Keith or myself, because we already have all the right meters. We already know how to use them. We know how to interpret the results, and we know what kind of solutions to suggest that will actually stop it. So also the electric field on the bed was extremely high. So what was the source? 20,000 volt lines right outside the bedroom window, less than 12 feet away, because this is on the 3rd story. So there's this huge power line. Here's the power station. And as you can see, the magnetic field on the sidewalk gets lower as you go to the dead end. The client was right there. So on the sidewalk, it was 4 milligauss. And, so obviously that's it. Then I used the data logging capacity of the NFA 1000 meter. This is a 5-day data log. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So as you can see, the lowest the magnetic field on the pillow end of the bed ever gets is upper severe. And then it spends a good deal of time in the extreme. And then I pointed out to the client, you see these spikes here that go up to 20 and 16 milligauss? Yeah. Well, I told you to keep all the lights in the house off for this 5 days. Yeah, well, I guess we turn some of them on from time to time. Say, well, now we have another problem, ma'am. These spikes indicate internal wiring code violations, and you were doing your best to keep them off, except you had to every once in a while. And it was summer, so there was a lot of light, and they didn't have to use too much. But it points out that even if you're only 12 feet away from 20,000 volt lines, the wiring in your house can be 5 times worse. So I said, look, this is suppressing the release of melatonin. That's your master antioxidant rest and repair hormone. And, the AMA has numerous citations where they actually call melatonin an oncostatic agent. That means cancer stopping. That's like the brakes in your car. So she had numerous wiring code violations that are documentable. And then where she sits in the kitchen, holy smoke, it was almost 21 milligrams on the floor where she kept her stool. So I said, I'm going downstairs. So this is a $40 clamp meter called the Triplet 9200A. We clamped around this conduit or this circuit, and it got 4.6 amps of net current. That's out of balance. That's going to create a huge magnetic field. And so then we opened up the nearest sub panel. Holy smoke, it looks like 10 pounds of worms in a 5-pound can. And it would take an hour just to unpack that to get to the splices. So this here is a violation, the overfilling of a junction box. And the woman did spend several $1,000s hiring me for 2 days and the electrician for 7 days to try to fix these spikes. And we did fix these spikes. But I said, you know what? I know you're hoping and praying that you can fix this house, but you still can't solve the utility problem. So she moved and she recovered about 80%.
And I think that's the point that I was mentioning. Sometimes you can do remediation for wiring code violations, for example. And if there are no ambient magnetic fields that are in excess of desired levels, you're in great shape. But in that particular case that you were just talking about, with the proximity to a high voltage line, and of course I've seen this as well, you're not going to get away from that ambient field. And people want to believe that there's some kind of shielding that you can put on the house. They say, oh, okay, well, I'll shield it then. Have you had that experience as well, Eric?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, Keith. And I have a specific slide on that. Okay. And the most common thing people try to do is shielding and filtering. And let me show this little chart here.
And harmonizing.
Yeah, harmonizing. Oh, yeah, they want to wear a magic high-tech rabbit foot around their neck. So, you know, what building biologists like us, what we're trained and certified to do is educate. Well, educate. Remove the toxic device. Replace it with something less toxic. Reposition it. You know, distance is your friend. Just like with firecrackers, hand grenades, and even nuclear bombs, eventually there's a safe distance. But the Wi-Fi underneath your child's bed has to be unplugged immediately and repositioned at least out into the garage until you find an alternative. And that produces huge results. You can also reduce usage. Like don't use this circuit, which we just identified with has a magnetic field, until it's fixed. So that you have to repair internal code violations before you start filtering or shielding. That's just like putting a Band-Aid or some acne medicine on top of a festering staph infection. Sometimes you have to move. If you have an external source, like a cell tower, radar, or a power line, you cannot effectively shield from that and you have to move. But before you do get recommitted, it's a really good idea if you measure to see if the new place is better than the old place, because you don't want to get financially tangled up in a place that's just as bad or worse.
That's fantastic. That's terrific. So we've had a good conversation here, I think, on at least the beginnings of understanding non-native magnetic fields, alternating current magnetic fields. I just want to emphasize that although there are magnetic fields in life, there are no alternating current magnetic fields. So it's very, very foreign to life.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about types that can be remediated within a house, that they're not terribly uncommon. I don't know how you feel about this, Eric, but I kind of prioritize magnetic fields as the number one. That's the first thing I want to know. It's kind of like a go, no-go decision if they're ambient magnetic fields.
Yes. Now, what you mean ambient, you mean external source.
Correct. That's right.
So when I do a real estate pre-purchase assessment, the first thing I do is a walk around the property with my RF meters, 59B and Safe and Sound Pro, and even the mmWave one if that's in the neighborhood, and then the magnetic field meter. So if it's safe on an exterior walk around, then and only then does it make any sense to invest time and money to go inside and investigate the inside of the house. Because you can't stay well, much less get well, in a house that has severe and extreme concern, external sourced EMF. The site has to be safe. That's like principle number 1 of the building biology 25 principles. And yeah, magnetic fields. I have another little 2 or 3 slides on current on gas pipes, if you want to see that at some time.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that, and then we'll kind of wrap up. But also, let's mention before we quit how we're passing current through the ground itself and what effect that has. But go ahead with the gas lines.
Okay, so this is a real estate pre-purchase inspection. A cancer survivor had an offer in on a $3 million, 5,000 square foot house up in Lake Tahoe. It's now worth $5 million. And she says, "Oh, please tell me it's safe." I said, "No, I'm going to tell you what it is." Okay. So we get to the house and the homeowner is just leaving. And he goes, "EMF inspection? Ha ha ha. You're not going to find anything wrong. This house is perfect because I was the contractor. I built it." So we walk into the kitchen. We're seeing almost 9 milligauss at waist level. And it's much higher on the floor. And the homeowner is going, "Oh my God, I'm a cancer survivor. What am I going to do?" So let me check out what's going on down below. So we had gas lines running around, probably a 75 to 100-foot gas line, and there's electric current on that. And that's absolutely illegal. That means a neutral to ground connection. And then they had 1.5 amps on the feeder cable between the service entrance panel and the bedroom sub panel, easily 150 feet, maybe 200 feet of linear run. So this ran the whole length of the 75-foot staircase. I mean, the house was L-shaped. This went from one end of the L to the other, and the client's going, "Oh my gosh, I love this house." Yeah, well, you don't want to fall in love with the sick house. So the result was, I wrote them up a little report. It was nothing more than just photographs and code citation. And they ended up getting a $5,000 instant discount in less than a minute. The realtor said, "Okay, how about a $5,000 discount?" And yeah, I told them to ask for $5,000, and they actually got it fixed for $3,500. And so they got the house. They're happy. The woman is still cancer-free. I want to show you some other ones, though. This one here, this is the master bathroom toilet of 2 world-famous homeopathic doctors. They're clueless. They had a relative who's a really bright guy and also an electrician wire their house. Uh-oh, look at that. And then here's another one. I mean, why does it have to be that the toilets are often the worst place? But they sure are, and people spend the time there, including pregnant mothers. And then, of course...
Let's just spend a moment on that, Eric. Do you think that the peer-reviewed research with regard to exposure to magnetic field shows an increase in miscarriages?
Oh, without a doubt. Dr. D. Kuhn Lai, senior research scientist down at Kaiser Permanente Research Center in Oakland, he's got a bulletproof study where women were wearing magnetic field dosimeters on their upper arm. And it clearly shows that a one-time exposure to 16 milligauss or above is correlated to as high as a 600% increase in miscarriage. And even magnetic fields down as low as 3, 2, 3, 4, definitely related to miscarriage, as well as ADD, autism, and all the other unfortunate situations.
Yeah, none of these health effects are anything to overlook, but When we're talking about increase in miscarriage, we're talking about ending a life really before it begins.
Well, the body senses there's something wrong. You see, magnetic fields create a problem with the differentiation of cells. And, infants are multiplying the number of cells rapidly to become what God intended them to be. And if that gets warped or twisted, the body says this isn't going to turn out. And you have a spontaneous miscarriage.
Tragic.
Or a child that's born that's horribly handicapped.
Right, right. Yeah, go ahead and finish up with this example here with the these magnetic fields, or were you at the end here?
Well, these doctors, they said, yeah, I see it, but I don't really believe it. I said, well, certainly, sir, you ought to, because you're a world famous person in your own field. But just in case you don't believe me, believe these peer-reviewed studies, because I know that's what you quote a lot. You don't have to believe me. Just take a look at this. I report, I present, you decide. And you decide what level of risk is acceptable. Now, we see here that there's a 560% increase in all major cancers in children at 4 milligauss. What does 27 milligauss do? That's 8 times higher. Well, you may say you're an adult, you're not a child. Yeah. So it's going to take a little bit longer for you to get cancer. But, there's many. You're free to believe whatever you want, and we'll part company as friends, and you can call me back anytime you want. And this is fixable, by the way. And I suggest you use my EMF electrician. Oh no, we want our relative to come back. Ma'am, that's not going to work. He's the guy that created it. He may not know how to help me, or worse yet, he may defend his problem and make it difficult for me to solve it. I suggest you hire me and my EMF electrician that I've been training for 5 years. But there's a message right there. Don't have the guy that caused the problem come back and try to fix it.
Right.
He won't know, or he'll defend his mistake.
Yeah, that's absolutely a possibility. So this has been a great discussion. I just want to put that one last thing in that I mentioned, which is when they laid out how the grid in North America will function, with very few exceptions, every electric utility across the country returns current through the earth in a large proportion. And current flow equals magnetic field. So even if you have everything going on well in your home, you need to understand what the ambient levels are. In other words, what's traveling through the ground, even if you're not near the power lines. So I think this has been a great introductory discussion into magnetic fields. There's really a lot here. There's a great deal that can be... Are you still with me, Eric?
I am. Can you see me?
I can't right now, no.
Okay, hang on.
I think you might have the wrong window open.
Stop sharing. Okay, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so it's a good introduction to magnetic fields. There's quite a lot here. The majority of the situations can be remediated, but it's something that takes specialized knowledge and an understanding of what it takes to unravel one of these problems. So you really want to be working with somebody who has the right skills and abilities, I guess would be my message here. You want to mention how you would like to see people contact you if they have an interest?
Sure. You can find me on the buildingbiology.org website under Find an Expert. Or you can actually, let's see here. You can look up Windheim EMF, Windheim, Windheim. Or you can go to Windheim EMF Solutions. Or you can go to the Building Biology Institute Find an Expert page. or just put in Windheim EMF, and you'll see my YouTube channel. You'll see links to my website. Please use the contact form in order to conserve time and be of maximum benefit. Ask questions rather than sending me an essay. See, I'm interested in people who want to solve problems, not agree with their viewpoint on electricity. I want to hear, what is your problem? What do you want to have done? So I'm sure you can find me. The key thing is, how do you spell my name? Windheim, Windheim. Thanks, Keith.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric, for your time. I appreciate it. Great session.
Let's do it again.